Hello and welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another edition of Premier League predictions. This weekend is match week 11 in the Premier League. 5 games will take place on Saturday, 5 games will take place on Sunday, and then of course it will be the international break. We're live on YouTube, we're live on X, and we're live on Facebook. Please do get involved, give us your score predictions for this weekend's coming games. Now, Arsenal are currently 6 points clear at the top of the Premier League table, and that pains us to say that as Spurs fans. Manchester City, Liverpool and Sunderland are all in the top 4. And despite Spurs losing last time out in the Premier League at home against Chelsea, having 1 shot on target, Spurs do have another opportunity to go up to second in the Premier League table. But Spurs are 2 points away from second and 2 points also ahead of 11th place. So it's very, very tight in there right now. Of course, Wolves midweek sacked Victor Pereira, and they are sitting bottom of the Premier League table, the only winless side, 2 draws, 8 defeats. Nottingham Forest and West Ham also sat in the bottom 3. Now, as I mentioned, 5 games on Saturday, starting with Spurs v Manchester United at 12:30, and then 2 3 p.m. kickoffs on Saturday. Everton face Fulham and West Ham against Burnley. Then the 5:30 kickoff, Sunderland take on Arsenal, and then the late kickoff, 8 p.m. on a Saturday night, Chelsea against Wolves. 5 games on Sunday, Aston Villa take on Bournemouth, Brentford against Newcastle, Crystal Palace take on Brighton, Forest take on Leeds, and finally, the big one, Manchester City against Liverpool. Now, as per usual, I've got Gareth McGuinness with us, channel regular. Gareth, how are you?
All good, Chris. It was a difficult match week 10, let's be honest, for Tottenham fans. Yeah. But it was a much better match day 4 in the Champions League for Spurs fans. So let's hope that we get the Champions League team that played on a Tuesday against Copenhagen, and not the one we seen it against Chelsea last weekend against Man United on Saturday, because it's a huge game. I was on your podcast on Tuesday night, Chris, and I says I think it's a huge game for Thomas Frank regarding his team selection. I think this will be a sliding doors moment in terms of, you know, if he goes back to that pivot that most of the fan base disagree with, I think, you know, that's going to be that's going to lose a lot of the fans that are maybe unsure about Thomas Frank. But I think if he goes attacking, goes brave, and look, you can lose games of football, but there's a way to lose games, Chris. And what happened against Chelsea was arguably one of the worst, if not the worst, defeats at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. I can't think of a game ever at the Spurs Stadium where we literally created so little. I mean, the XG was an all-time low record, so that proves it, doesn't it?
Yeah, 0.05. We're certainly hoping for a lot more on Saturday against Manchester United. Gareth, before we get into match week 11 and the score predictions, talking about these games this weekend, let's go over the results and performances from certain clubs from match week 10. Now, let me just run through the results from match week 10. Liverpool, of course, beat Aston Villa 2-0. Tottenham losing at home against Chelsea 1-0. Forest 2. Manchester United 2. Fulham beat Wolves 3-0 at Craven Cottage. Crystal Palace beating Brentford 2-0. Arsenal winning 2-0 away at Burnley. Brighton beating Leeds 3-0 at home. Manchester City beating Bournemouth 3-1 at the Etihad. And West Ham getting the first win under Nuno Espirito Santo at the London Stadium, beating Newcastle 3-1. And Monday Night Football, of course, was Sunderland 1, Everton 1. Where do you want to start with match week 10? Who impressed you match week 10? Who certainly didn't impress you? I know you spoke and touched on Tottenham's performance there, but we all thought that guy Frank, the Manchester United fan, you know, who's on to get the haircut. Well, it would have been counting on this game against Spurs at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, but of course they drew 2-2 away at Nottingham Forest. But and I suppose we ought to mention as well Pereira getting sacked at Wolves finally after 10 games.
I think that's a good place to start, Chris, because it's never, you know, we're all fans. The pundits are all pundits, and no one likes seeing managers get sacked because it's a sign of failure at a club. You know, there's no Wolves fans that will have enjoyed seeing Vitor Pereira be sacked. You know, it was only 4 or 5 weeks ago, Chris, we were talking about him drinking in the pubs with the fans. Yeah. There was a bit of a connection there with Wolves fans and the manager, but that's evaporated very, very quickly. 10 games on, winless in the league, and only have had some results in the cup. But it was never going to be enough for. Let's be honest, Wolves are an established Premier League club. So it was. We seen this with Gareth McGuinness last year. He was. To be fair to Wolves, they probably give him a lot more than maybe some other clubs would have given. And I feel Gareth McGuinness, I think he got December last year. I think he only had 3 wins from his first 14 games, and Wolves are quite patient because I think they're quite understanding with the manager's situation. Whether it's Vitor Pereira, Gary O'Neill, Lopetegui before that, they've always sold their best players. So there's a realization that it's going to be difficult for the current manager. But like we always see it, Chris, eventually there comes a point where you have to make a change because it was getting pretty ugly at Wolves. If you remember back last year, Chris, to the final game Gary O'Neill had, Cunha get sent off at the end of the game against Ipswich, and there was a bit of a brawl, and Cunha lost the captaincy, I think, as well. And it was ugly scenes at Molyneux. And if you go back to Wolves' final home game under Vitor Pereira, it was similar scenes where the fans were angry. They conceded a last-minute goal against a relegation rival in Burnley. And to be fair, he got another week, but I think the manner of the defeat at Fulham, who have been struggling, Fulham were 17th going on the last weekend's matches, and they turned them over 3-0, and it was quite a convincing one. So it probably left Wolves with no choice in the end up. But look, we're all pundits in ourselves, as podcasters, as people that love football, as fans. But we may criticize managers, but it's never good to see managers being sacked because it is a symbol of failure. So look, Wolves, I believe, are in talks now with Middlesbrough over getting Rob Edwards, a former Wolves player. I think it's probably the right direction to go. I mean, they were heavily linked with Gary O'Neill. I don't think that would have been a wise move because I think the fans, they want to see something different, don't they? And I think the fact that Rob Edwards, he done quite well, didn't keep them up, but it went all the way to the final day. It didn't quite work at Watford, but he's done a very, very good job at Middlesbrough. But it's a big decision for Rob Edwards. I know he's a former Wolves player, and I think that will definitely help bring the fans on side, and that's what Wolves need. But a galvanisation amongst the fans and the players. Let's just try and get the first one. Don't even think about just trying to stay up. Let's just get a first one and build from there, because ones in the Premier League are not easy this year. There's no team out there you would think, that's an easy 3 points. We'll come on to speak about West Ham and Newcastle, but you thought last week Newcastle were a shoe-in, and we see a big upset. So the Wolves just need to focus on getting those first 3 points and going from there. Rob Edwards would be a good appointment, but it's a big decision for Rob Edwards because if you were a betting man, Chris, you'd probably bet on Middlesbrough being in the Premier League next year before you bet on Wolves being on it.
Gareth, are you worried about Arsenal sitting at the top, 6 points clear right now?
Worried as a Tottenham fan, of course, but I don't think it's a great surprise. Liverpool have bounced back this week, but there's still a lot of work to be done. We'll come on to speak about Liverpool because it's been a big few days for them. But Man City, we know, haven't been at the levels the last couple of seasons. And yes, they're doing decent this year. They're in a great position for most clubs, but Man City they're quite a bit off Arsenal. I think they're 7 points behind Arsenal, so they're still quite far off where they want to be. But I think Erling Haaland's kind of carrying Man City. I don't really see Man City as this brilliant Man City team of old. I think it's more of an Erling Haaland masterclass. I mean, I was looking. I think Erling Haaland's top goal scorer, and the second top goal scorer and 2 goals is own goals, and then the rest are all in 1 goal each. Now, it might have changed as of last night in the Champions League, but it shows you how much they're relying on Erling Haaland. I mean, it was funny that time Pep Guardiola was calling Spurs the Hurricane team, but you could argue that this Man City team are more reliant on Haaland than Spurs ever were on Hurricane because we always had Son. So it does feel like if anything happened to Erling Haaland or he's, and we're talking about a top player, but if his form even dips slightly where he goes maybe 2 games where he won, it's difficult to see how Man City are going to win football matches. So I think at the minute, Chris, all signs point to Arsenal being comfortable winners, but we know things can change very, very quickly. But what I would say is I think, and it pains me to say this, all round as a team defensively and going forward, they are the best of a bad bunch. Now, that's not to take anything away from Arsenal, but Liverpool aren't at the level they were last year. Man City are not at the level they were 2 years ago. And realistically, there's no one else good enough to sustain a challenge at this present time. So it's Arsenal's league to lose. And if they don't win it from here, you wonder what they need to win a league, because for me, they're the most consistent team over the last 3-4 seasons. They've been second. So they're the next step as they go and win it. I mean, Chris, if you think back to when Spurs were second, third under Pochettino, the biggest difference between Arsenal and Spurs is Arsenal have backed the manager. Spurs didn't do that. And Arsenal have got stronger every single season. You know, you could speak about last season, maybe they weren't as close in points, but they had a great run in the Champions League. Whereas previous seasons, they didn't do well in the Champions League. I think around Europe now, and you're seeing this, Arsenal are being taken more seriously. They've beaten Real Madrid last season. They give PSG a decent fight over 2 games. So it is worrying from a Spurs point of view, but there's absolutely nothing we can do about it at the moment. We just need to hope, as Tottenham fans, that Man City and Erling Haaland can continue these numbers, and maybe Arsenal have a bit of a dip somewhere. Because if you look at the players, they haven't exactly got everyone fit. They've had a number of injuries, and they're still coping without it. I mean, I watched Match of the Day last night. I think it's 8 clean sheets in a row. And I think the only game there was a number of shots on target was the Brighton game, where they made a lot of changes in the League Cup. Every other game, it's like 0-0-1. Teams are struggling to get a shot on target against them. So it's difficult to see at the minute how they're going to start dropping points.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. Not conceding goals is one thing. They're not even conceding any shots. You're absolutely right. But I wouldn't rule out Manchester City and Liverpool. Of course, Liverpool got back to winning ways. I saw one of their fans tweet something, I think it was yesterday, and they said that we're third in the Premier League. It's a big crisis, but we're third in the Premier League. We're 6th in the Champions League table, just beat Real Madrid. We've beat Arsenal in the Premier League. And, let's wait until all of our new signings are actually firing and getting that consistency in the team. You certainly wouldn't rule those 2 sides out, would you? And Steve Dyer here, watching on Facebook, says Arsenal are going to bottle it again.
Well, I mean, Arsenal have to answer that question. There's no evidence out there that Arsenal can hold themselves together, because we haven't seen it really under Arteta and the league. He won the FA Cup in the COVID season when he come in mid-season. But since then, at every big moment, they've found a way to lose. And there is similar comparisons to that Pochettino Spurs team, other than Arteta's had a lot more money and a lot more backing. But you kind of felt that it was going to be Spurs' time. But every time it got to the better end of something, whether it be a cup competition or the Premier League, they would find ways to lose games, despite probably being the best team around at that time. So Arsenal still, until you won that first title, they are going to be asked questions. But the worrying thing for me at the minute is, if they're in a position where they're if they go 9, 10, 11, 12 points clear, it makes it more difficult to bottle it, because you're not really under any pressure. If it got to the last 6 games and Man City and Liverpool were within 3 or 4 points, that is a completely different question that Arsenal are going to be asked. Because at the moment they're cruising, aren't they? They're not really, they're winning every week. So the teams behind them are just having to win. They keep the same distance. And look, Arsenal go to Sunderland on Saturday. It's a big game, because Sunderland are unbeaten at home this year. It's not been an easy place to go. I'm sure Granit Xhaka will be up for it. The former Arsenal player and Sunderland captain, he will be up to try and prove a point to Arsenal that maybe he's still good enough to be at that club. I know he enjoyed his time there, but he left. And he will look at players like Norgard and Jorginho. He was there previously. I think I'm as good as them. So it'll be interesting to see. It's a big game under the lights, 5:30. And Sunderland will be absolutely bouncing for this. So not an easy game, but if they can win this game, Chris, and they can have their feet up on Sunday, knowing that Man City and Liverpool have to play each other, and one of them is certain to drop points, or they could play out a draw, Arsenal could be stretching 9 points clear of 9 and 10 points clear of those teams. So, I mean, that's a huge gap going into that international break. And then you would look at Spurs and go, well, if Spurs don't get a result at Arsenal, then oh my God, they could be in an unbelievable position going into December. So I think the next few weeks are crucial in terms of the title race, because if Arsenal get too far clear, Chris, it's going to be a massive, massive ask for those teams behind who, let's be honest, Chris, look more vulnerable. We haven't seen anyone do a job on Arsenal. The game they lost against Liverpool was a wonder free kick. It wasn't like Liverpool battered them. Liverpool have been battered by Brentford, battered by Crystal Palace, battered by Newcastle, and somehow find a way to win. Man City have lost to Spurs, have lost to Brighton. So they look a lot more stable than those 2 teams, and that would be the worrying point of a view from a Spurs fan at the moment, is you don't really see it coming at Arsenal based on the evidence on the pitch.
So on Saturday, Tottenham Hotspur face Manchester United at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. It is the early kickoff on Saturday, 12:30 p.m. Now, Tottenham Hotspur, of course, last time out in the Premier League, lost at home against Chelsea, losing the game 1-0. We only had one shot on target, and the XG 0.05, the lowest in Tottenham's Premier League history. Now, Tottenham have struggled at home in the Premier League in 2025, having played 20 matches, 4 wins, 4 draws, and 12 defeats. In fact, Spurs have lost 41 Premier League games since moving in our new home back in 2019. We do have an excellent record at home, though, in recent years in Europe. Of course, Spurs beating Copenhagen 4-0 in the Champions League on Tuesday evening. Now, 22 of our last European games, 18 wins and 4 draws. Javi Simons certainly put in a shift as well. And a lot of players took their opportunity on Saturday, which was great to see. Now, in the Premier League, if Spurs beat Manchester United this Saturday in the 12:30 kickoff, we could move up to second in the Premier League table. But I will add that Spurs are only 2 points off being 11th. So it's very, very tight in there. Spurs are currently in 6th place. Manchester United are 8th. Manchester United are unbeaten in their last 4 Premier League games, beating Sunderland 2-0, then beating Liverpool at Anfield 2-1, beating Brighton 4-2 at Old Trafford, and most recently drawing 2-2 away at Nottingham Forest. Now, of course, before the 1-0 home defeat against Chelsea, Spurs went to Everton, won 3-0. The time before that was another defeat at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, losing 2-1 against Aston Villa. Now, overall, in our history, previous meetings in all competitions played 177. Spurs have won 44, 43 draws, and 90 Manchester United victories. Now, of course, Spurs beat Manchester United in the Europa League final on the 21st of May, Brennan Johnson scoring the only goal, and Tottenham completed the Premier League double over Manchester United last season. They last won 3 consecutive league games against the Red Devils back in 1959-1960 season. Gareth, how are you feeling ahead of this Manchester United game? Are you nervous? Are you confident? How are you feeling?
Nervous because, Chris, I've had the same kind of look at the table that you've had, and we could be in a great position if we won this game, but we could be in a very, very poor position if we lose it. I mean, it'll be a nervous wit if we lose and we're watching everyone else playing, thinking, oof, team one's here and team one's there. We can end ourselves, mid-table, as you say, and that would be worrying. Because I don't think we've had the hardest fixtures of our, compared to some of the other teams around us. I think there's more difficult games to come between now and the new year, and these first cycle of games. So that would be a massive concern. And well, going back to Saturday, we'll speak about the recent record against United, because they're United for years was an absolute nightmare for Spurs, as it was for our teams. But recently, Spurs have had a really good record, but so have a lot of teams. But we'll come back to that. We'll come on to Saturday, because I watched the Chelsea game last night, and Quarabag were opening Chelsea up for fun. And we spoke about the Chelsea game last weekend when we did the predictions for match week 10. And I says to you, there's a vulnerability about Chelsea. If you put pressure on them, they make mistakes. I mean, the centre halves for Chelsea last night were making mistakes all over the place because Quarabag were pressing them. And Quarabag are, a team on the up, but they're from Azerbaijan. Last night was the first time they ever took points off English opposition. So, that shows you the massive difference between Azerbaijan and the English teams. And Quarabag, they give Chelsea absolutely nightmares last night and should have won the game, led on with a massive opportunity that the keeper saved. So we looked terrified against Chelsea on Saturday, absolutely terrified. We never pressed them once. We never put them under any pressure. It was so comfortable for Chelsea. Jamie Carragher done a great piece on Monday Night Football of, there wasn't any great thing that Chelsea were doing to stop Spurs playing. He pointed out numerous things when Vicario had the ball of how players could have helped the goalkeeper, helped the defenders by showing for the ball. But there was a real lack of desire to get on the ball, a real lack of desire to play forward, play any kind of risky passes. And Chelsea, in the end, by the time the second half had finished, they probably had their best spell towards the end of the game because they couldn't believe how comfortable Spurs were. And Spurs looked beaten a long way from the final whistle going, and they were only 1-0 down. So that was a big worry mentally, and just how limited we looked. I mean, there's I think Jamie Carragher pointed out about the lack of progressive play. But you look at Bentancur on Tuesday night against Copenhagen, it was like watching a completely different player. And I can kind of understand with Polina, and I think Jamie Carragher made good points why maybe it didn't work at Bayern Munich and maybe some of the top teams didn't sign him, because he's a brilliant defensive midfielder, but in terms of on the ball, that's not his skills, and that's fine if he play to his strengths. But Bentancur, for me, as a player that likes to get forward, presses high, wins the ball back, and does like they play progressive passes in the final third. And under Thomas Frank, we haven't seen enough of that. It was like watching the old Bentancur on Tuesday night against Copenhagen. We haven't seen that from him all season long. So from what I took out of Saturday, Chris, was yes, players at times were poor on the ball, but I do think the tactical approach was to sit off and let Chelsea have the ball and maybe try and score from a counter attack or set piece, and that's just not good enough for Tottenham Hotspur. It's not acceptable. We've seen too many performances, especially at home, where we're respecting the opposition, and it's almost as if there's a directive that we're not good enough to play forward, or we're not good enough to get on the ball and try and make things happen. Because yes, Copenhagen are not the they're not the barometer of success. They're not going to be a team that qualifies for the next round of the Champions League. But this is a team that beat Man United a couple of years ago, so they're not completely hopeless. They're not a team that are incapable of picking up points. They're just not a team that's probably going to get much further in this competition. And let's be honest, Chris, Spurs could have had double digits against them. It was as we recognise that Copenhagen aren't a strong European side. Spurs could have beat them so badly that it could have been a record scoreline defeat for them. Because you think about the opportunities we missed, the amount of chances we created, and overall, Chris, it was an absolute pleasure to watch. And I just can't understand that we haven't seen more of that under Thomas Frank. And maybe Chelsea is a big turning point, but I think the evidence will come on Saturday against United. And we can't go back to how it was in previous weeks.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I feel like this past week, there are a lot of positives to talk about, especially against Copenhagen, as you've mentioned, a lot of creativity. All of us fans, especially the ones that went to the stadium, everyone before the game that I spoke to, they were saying, where's the creativity coming from? Where's the goals coming from? But of course, they certainly came, and every player put a shift in. But a lot of people aren't getting carried away, particularly having watched that Chelsea game and creating so little, only having one shot on target. Gareth, do you worry about the creativity in Premier League games? Because like you've just mentioned there, it was FC Copenhagen, no disrespect to them, but it was very, very different to a Premier League game. And I'll give you an example. The amount of time that Xavi Simons had on the ball, excellent performance, man of the match performance. Of course, he didn't want to come off the pitch, looked disappointed when he came off, and rightly so, because he's probably feeling like, look, I've had a tough start to my career at Tottenham. I'm playing well. I'm getting time on the ball. I'm creating chances. He desperately wants to score as well. And he probably would have felt very disappointed, and understandably so, because he wants to have that very special game. He played an hour, got man of the match, but we need to see it in the Premier League as well. And as I mentioned, only one shot on target against Chelsea on Saturday. And it's really interesting, and I want to get your opinion on this. When George Sessions from Press Association, in the press conference after the game, after Chelsea game, he said to Thomas Frank, I just don't understand the fact that, Spurs are 1-0 down at half time, haven't come out fighting, and the team haven't had a shot on target in that second half. Is it a lack of creativity? Is it a lack of confidence? What is it? Is it tactical? Where do you see the problem lying? Because as I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of positives to take out of Tuesday's game against Copenhagen. Cowlin, yes, he had a couple of chances. He put one wide and put one over the bar. Two great chances, actually. You would have expected a striker to bury both of them. He did set up Odegaard for his goal as well. So there was positive signs with him. There's positive signs with some players, but creativity in the Premier League, this is going to be a very, very different game against Manchester United.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go back to your point about the creativity and speak about Xavi Simons, because Chris, we've spoken about Xavi Simons quite a lot, whether it be on the podcast or whether it be on this production show. And I did say, as poor as he's been at times, I think the way the team is set up and the way the team is playing does not suit Xavi Simons or a player like Xavi Simons. Xavi Simons is a creative player. It has to be allowed to try things and make mistakes, because that's what creative players do. For as many brilliant things as they'll do, I mean, you think about one of the best ever creative midfielders in the Premier League was Kevin De Bruyne. But he would pull off these unbelievable passes, and you would see videos clipped up. But I'm sure if you watch Man City every single week, there was probably loads of those that didn't come off. He didn't just start doing that. He doesn't do it once a game and it comes off every single time. So the way the team's designed, and they're so deep at times, and me and my dad spoke about this. It was so refreshing to see Muani actually have support around him, because when he's been playing in previous games, he's been up there on his own, fighting with two centre halves and no one near him because the team's so far back defensively. And I think that's been had a massive impact on Xavi Simons, because he's come onto a team that's been asked, and Thomas Frank hasn't admitted this, but it's the evidence doesn't lie. He's coming onto a team that's a pragmatic team, and creative players struggle in pragmatic setups. You think about teams like, I watched Bournemouth go to Man City on Sunday. And yes, Erling Haaland was at his best and defeated them. But Bournemouth opened Man City up as many times as they let Man City in. Man City just have better players and punished them. But there was a bravery from Bournemouth to go to Man City and go, we're going to play our way. We're not going to sit back and respect you. And Bournemouth were well in the game up until the end of it, where Man City ran out 3-1 winners. And I think that's the biggest difference with Spurs at the minute. Spurs are looking at the opposition and worrying about the opposition instead of thinking, Chris, how many managers in the Premier League would kill for Kudus, Muani, and a Xavi Simons front three? We're talking about a French international up front who scored 16 goals for Juventus between January and the end of the season last year. Kudus, who we know has been the best dribbler going forward in Europe and tick-ons, and Xavi Simons, a renowned superstar from the Bundesliga and a Dutch international who scored against England in the semi-final of the Euros. So, we're talking about good players here, but they've been so isolated at times, and the manager's just not suited to their strengths playing this way. So I think, and I hope that Tuesday night was a turning point, because we've seen, yes, albeit against Copenhagen, but we've seen Xavi Simons having an impact. And the cross in for Miani was the first real bit of world-class potential we've seen, where he arcs his body, goes under space and bends the ball around, and he puts it on an absolute plate for Miani, who should score. But look, Miani needed that the other night. Too many games he's been on. He's been starved of service. How's he ever going to score a goal if he's getting no service? And look, I know we've been critical of Richarlison, and he was poor when he came on again the other night. But, you put any striker in that team, and include Erling Haaland, if he's not getting service, he's got absolutely no chance of scoring goals. And that has been the biggest issue. And we've seen even in recent weeks, Chris, with Kudus has went off the boil because he's getting so little of the ball. He needs the ball to feet. He needs the ball in behind. He needs to be able to take players on, and he needs support around him. They take players away from him. Teams were doubling up on Kudus. Pliny and Bentancur's miles back, so they can double up and put two on him. And the only way Kudus can go is either down the line and try and beat him and whip across him, or knock it straight back to his right back, Pedro Porro. And even we see with Pedro Porro on Tuesday night, he was overlapping. He wasn't doing that against Chelsea. He was sitting in a position for a pass backwards. And the intentions have got to be better if we're going to climb up this table, because if you're relying on set pieces and counter-attacks, you're not going to go far, and you're not going to progress as a football club. Don't get me wrong, Chris. There is games for it. Arsenal away, PSG away. No Tottenham fans going to, criticise for being pragmatic, because we know they're better teams than us right now. But at home against Chelsea, Man United, Bournemouth, Burnley, Aston Villa, we do expect our team to be on the front foot, and that hasn't been the case.
Gareth, how would you describe Thomas Frank's tactics and the way that he sets the team up? Because when he was asked in a press conference recently about being a defensive coach and being a pragmatic coach, and you used that word a couple of minutes ago, pragmatic, and then he said about, who's saying that? Is it journalists? Is it fans online? Is it social media? He didn't like that question, and he said a couple of occasions that his teams have scored a lot of goals, and he's confident that this team will score a lot of goals in the future.
No manager will ever admit to being pragmatic. Even Jose Mourinho, he was the master of being pragmatic for 20 years. Never admitted to being pragmatic. Remember that famous conversation where he pulled out the press conference where he pulled out the list of all the strikers that scored goals under him: Drogba, Benzema, Ibrahimovic. He didn't like the question, but Yes, we
But
have
but
great.
but also let me ask you, because I was having this debate with someone the other day, and they were saying, Chris, look, you knew Spurs fans knew what you were going to get with Thomas Frank, with the types of football that he played at Brentford, and I actually come out and said, well, I thought that Brentford a lot of the time were a very entertaining team. Would you agree and go along with that?
I think because they were together for so long, they were probably so well drilled. Where we know, and I'm a coach myself, it does take time, but you have to show the fans that there's something to get behind for support. I mean, I think back to the early days of Pochettino. Yes, there was problems, but you could see in certain games that what the team was trying to do. I think it was Jamie Redknapp says it's the worst performance he can remember from a Spurs team at home. He says, I have no idea what they were trying to do. Jamie Carragher was analysing it. He says, the worry for me, and he says, I like Thomas Frank, Jamie Carragher says, but he says, the worry for me, we've seen this with Nuno, and we've seen this with our managers at our clubs, where it's a massive transition from being at a mid-table or team fighting relegation, and then to try and transfer that to a top club who are expected to win every week, or at least most weeks, especially at home. It's a different kind of pressure. And, if Brentford lose a couple of games at home, it's not a disaster. If Spurs do, it's a big problem. And the fans at Spurs are not, we're not patient, because we pay a lot of money. I mean, Chris, the other night on the TNT, this is, it's 60 quid a game here to watch them play Copenhagen at home. If you're going to charge that, we expect the best. And the home performances have been so bad in the Premier League that it's, the fans have every right to be fuming. And Chris, it's not just about losing games. As you say, one shot on target against an average Chelsea team who just got beaten by Sunderland, just drew by quarterback, and they just rolled us over as if we were a Sunday League team. Jamie Carragher said it himself. Spurs
they have changed the price. Yeah, they have changed the price for the Dortmund game, and I'm glad about that, because I tell you what, I said this the other night. When Spurs are playing, or when any team in England are playing the Champions League, especially, you mentioned Pochettino there. When Poch was our manager, there was not a spare ticket in town for that game, for any home game in the Champions League. The place was sold out, particularly at our new stadium. So we've got to see more fans on the seats for these Champions League games, because I hated seeing so many empty seats for a Champions League game. It felt like and I said this the other night as well, it felt like a League Cup game in the early stages when you've got that amount of seats empty.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I think there was 44,000 roughly at the game, which is criminal. But what I would say is there was still more positive energy. There was still a louder atmosphere. As opposed to Chelsea. We want the stadium full, of course we do, and I think it's great that the club have rectified the Dortmund game, but it just shows you that if you give the team something to get behind, you will get that support on the pitch. I mean, Chris, I was at the 4-1 defeat to Chelsea, Ange's first defeat, and the players were clapped off the pitch after getting beat 4-1, because the effort was there, the intensity was there, the desire to play forward. And Chris, the one thing I want to see, and every fan wants their team to do, and that's why I'll be so delighted if I was a Bournemouth fan right now, they play with absolutely no fear. You've got to go for it. They can beat anyone, and Spurs played with fear against Chelsea, and that is just not acceptable. Yeah.
That's what any Spurs fan wants to see, that you've got to go for it. You've definitely got to go for it, and that's why it was so disappointing not to have a shot in that second half. Now, Manchester United are winless in their last 7 meetings with Tottenham in all competitions. As you mentioned this earlier, Gareth, about their record recently against Spurs, drawing 2 and losing 5, losing each of their last 4. The team to win 5 in a row against the Red Devils were Liverpool between 2000 and 2002. I've got some very quick questions for you, if you can give me some very quick answers. Carragher said it was like watching a League Two team play against a Premier League team, talking about the Spurs v Chelsea performance. Was that harsh?
No, it was completely right. I mean, in League Two's being generous, it looked like a Sunday League team that just got it under the FA Cup third round, and we're going to play Liverpool at Anfield, and literally had no... I mean, couldn't believe they were there. It was that the level between the two teams was scary, and the scary thing was, Chris, that Chelsea weren't even that good. We made them look good.
Do you know what also frustrated me is I don't think Sanchez is a particularly good goalkeeper for Chelsea, and the fact that we didn't test him in the goal, especially in that second half, that's what I can't get my head around. It is frustrating, and when you saw Thomas Frank's face as well when he was told in the press conference that the XG was 0.05, and he came out and said, "I've never managed a team creating so little." That you could tell he felt that.
Well, Chris, I hope that and the Jamie Carragher comments hurt him, because it has hurt him. If he does not want to hear that about the team that he's managing. But Chris, I'll go back to, do you remember the game at Wembley against Barcelona? We got beat 4-2. The year we got to the Champions League final. We lost the game 4-2, right? Barcelona were unbelievable that night. Messi was incredible.
Yeah.
And there was a realization that, yes, we didn't play that well, but we were completely outplayed by an unbelievable Barcelona team that probably should have won the Champions League. They had a nightmare at Anfield, and we probably should have played them in the final that year.
Yeah.
I mean, Liverpool produced a miracle comeback, but that night, you just had to clap Barcelona off the pitch. They were incredible, but there was still a desire and a fight that Spurs needed even a bit of a game, and losing the game 4-2. It wasn't like that on Saturday. It wasn't like Chelsea were just miles too good for us. We just gave them far too much respect and let them have a comfortable victory. That's the difference. And if Spurs fans see fight, desire, and intensity, willing to play forward and get beat, I think fans will still say, you know what, at least we had a go.
Gareth, I want to ask you a little bit about Mohamed Kudus, because in my opinion, he was completely taken out of the game, and he has been, our best player this season so far. But he was taken out of the game by Cucurella on Saturday against Chelsea. Is that a worry? The fact that, I suppose it's fair to say our sole consistent performer in the final third was taken out of the game. Will other teams target him to do exactly the same in the future?
Well, I think we've spoken about this, haven't we, Chris? I think that Kudus is starting to suffer the way Xavi Simons is suffering now. Kudus has the experience of the Premier League, but I think teams have caught on to how creative Kudus is and how much we rely on him. That there's very, very good managers in the Premier League, Chris, and a lot of these managers now have brilliant analysts watching every move of every game. And we're now in their 11th match week. Teams have a fair idea now how our teams are going to play. And that's why you see, Chris, the likes of Sunderland now coming up. Over the next few weeks, teams are going to start to suss out how Sunderland play. So it will become more difficult for Sunderland to win games because they've got so many new players. They're new to the league. But like with Spurs, with Ange, teams caught on how Ange went about it after 10, 11 games. We were catching teams cold those first few weeks. But as the season goes on, it becomes more challenging. And you've seen over the last few weeks, Kudus' form's deteriorated. Maybe he can do better, but for me, it's more of a setup problem than it is an individual issue. Because, look, we know we need better attackers. We know we need to go into the market in January. But I don't think Miani's been anywhere near the player he was for Juventus when he came on there on loan. Odegaard, I do think there is something there. I think the manager has to get more out of him. Richarlison, maybe you could excuse because he's been poor under every manager, really, and he's had injury problems. Tell hasn't been good enough, but there was a player at Bayern Munich, everyone tells me. So it's up to the manager to get the best out of these players. We know we need more if we're going to challenge for the major honours. I still think there's enough there for a team to be minimum making games entertaining. I think there's other clubs in the lower end of the league would kill for some of the players that we have. So they can't be as bad as what they're looking. They do need support. And, I think even bringing Pape Sarr on Tuesday night, it just gave a different look to the team. And we just looked a lot more adventurous, a lot more attacking. And we looked as well, Chris. And if you were speaking about, a lot of reliance on Kudus. If you're setting up with Polina, Bendencourt, a back four and a goalkeeper on behind them, you're limiting the threats you have on the pitch. You're limiting on what you can put into the final third. With Pape Sarr in there, instead of a Polina, you've got more of a, with Pape Sarr's a goal scorer, you've got more threat on that pitch, and you give teams more to worry about. So the manager's got to find a way to get his best players into the team. Basically, we know we need to win matches, Chris. But the first thing he's got to do if he wants to be successful at Spurs is he's got to win the home fans over. And the only way to win home fans over is winning games of football, or at least if you can't win every week, be at least entertaining. I mean, Chris, I don't know what the fans talked about in the pub after the Chelsea game. One Kudus shot. What is this? Like, I mean, it's not Sunday League. It's Premier League football. I mean,
it's hard.
I've been at games. We've lost we've lost matches, but I go, oh, do you know what? That move was good, and if that goal had went done, might have been a different game. There was certain things in there about the game that I seen and I liked. There was nothing they like about Saturday, and if that continues, the manager's got a massive problem.
Well, talking of the manager, across spells with Brentford and Spurs, Thomas Frank has suffered 9 defeats in his last 16 home Premier League matches, winning 3 and drawing 4. Before this run, his Brentford side had won 7 of their previous 8 home games, drawing 1. Now, we're over 20 minutes talking about Spurs so far, and we haven't mentioned Mickey van der Ven's goal. What was better, Sons or Van der Ven's? Both incredible strikes.
I think we could do a whole podcast on Van der Ven because what a player he is.
Incredible.
For me, Van der Ven all day long. I think that was the better goal. One, because he's a centre half. I've actually watched it again a fair few times today. And the balance, the speed, the aggression, the left foot, the right foot. It's one of the best goals I've ever seen. I'm not just saying that because I'm a Spurs fan, but lay me another player around the world that could do that right now. I don't know, in that way. Yes, we know there's loads of players out there that can dribble and weave in between. I don't know if there's anyone can just burst past people, boy them left foot, right foot, and just bang it under the corner as if it was. He made it look easy. He made it look so easy, and it's just mind blowing how. And it's Chris. It's not as if it was a one off. He's produced runs like that before where he set players up.
Yeah.
You think about Son's goal against Everton. You think about Johnson's goal against Man United.
Yeah.
And it just, Chris, we had a joke a few weeks ago about players that get you off your feet. And, we laughed when we said about a centre half, but I mean, he is a bit of a freak. I mean, there's no other centre half around that I've ever seen that could do something like that. I mean, it was just breathtaking. And I mean, it couldn't have came at a better time. I know we won the game, but the Spurs fans have struggled at home this year to see anything of like top quality or of like magical moments, and that was a magical moment. I mean, we spoke about what the fans have been talking about after the game in the pubs after the Chelsea game. I mean, they probably couldn't have stopped talking about Van der Ven's goal in the pubs after the Copenhagen game, or they probably couldn't have said, you know what, we won 4-0, but we could have won 10. It was exciting. Like, I watched the game at home on Tuesday night, and I mean, I could hardly sleep because it was like, you're pumped up after that. That's what we want to see every week. And
it was so important, though, Gareth, wasn't it? It was so important that all of us fans saw that and saw what some of these players are capable of. And someone said to me before the game, my friend Grant said, what do you want to see out of today's game? And I said, I want to see Xavi Simons have a really good performance, and just for his own sake. And so the Spurs fans, because you've noticed over the past couple of weeks, a lot of criticism has been towards Xavi Simons, particularly with the price tag, and particularly when people thought we were going to get Morgan Gibbs-White and then Eze and then Xavi Simons, and a lot of people said, well, actually, we got the better deal. And then a lot of people criticised him, particularly after that Chelsea game. So it's very, very important for him. Let me just read you this stat. Spurs are averaging just 9.7 shots per game this season, 97 shots in 10 matches. It's our lowest average in a Premier League campaign on record since 1997-1998.
Again, that's more evidence to Thomas Frank that you are setting up a pragmatic approach. I mean, every stat you find backs up the fan opinion that this is a pragmatic football team at the moment. He's got to change that. I mean, that was a breath of fresh air. And I know things can happen in games, and I don't think the fourth goal happens without Van der Ven's goal. I think that kind of goal, it just gives everybody a lift, the fans. And Romero's like, do you know what? I want some of this. I'm going to get forward. And I think everything just went rogue. And at that point, Spurs could have scored 3 or 4 goals in the space of 5 or 6 minutes because Copenhagen were rattled. I mean, Chris, when was the last time you seen a team where they looked so rattled? The manager was tearing pages up and trying to get subs on, and he didn't know what to do because Spurs were just in full throttle, and that is what we want to see every week. And it kind of reminded you back to the Pochettino days where we'd score 1, then we'd score a second, then we'd score a third, then we'd score a fourth, and the game was over. Team was beaten. And it got to the point where teams were beaten in the tunnel before they walked out at the old White Hart Lane. That is what Thomas Frank needs to bring back here. As he the manager to do it, it's probably against his beliefs. But if that is an evidence on Tuesday night to get this place rocking on Saturday at lunchtime, I don't know what is. I really don't know what is. And that's why I think it's a massive game for the manager, because I'm going to the game on Saturday. If I see a 11:15 on Saturday, a negative team selection, that's going to completely kill my feeling about the game. Let's get the fans up for the game. Let's put an attacking team out. And let's be honest, Man United are a vulnerable team. Yes, they've had a good run, but they were, against Nottingham Forest, some of the chances they were giving away, they're a shambles at the back still. They are there to be got at. Let's go about it a different way.
Gareth, before I ask you about Manchester United's season and get your predicted lineup and score prediction, you've mentioned in this short chat so far, you've mentioned Pochettino a couple of times. Now, in the last 24 hours, an interview has come out that Pochettino has come out and said that he wants to come back to England. He wants to come back to the Premier League one day. He spoke about Tottenham, saying, what enjoyment he had at Spurs and how we nearly won the league and how we nearly won the Champions League. And he also spoke out about Daniel Levy and thanked him for the opportunity he got at Tottenham. Would you like to see Pochettino back at Tottenham one day? And do you think it's a realistic option for Tottenham? It might be a couple of years down the line. It might be 5 years down the line, but can you see it happening?
I read the article today, and it's not the first time he spoke about Tottenham and returning to Tottenham or returning to the Premier League. I don't think he's particularly enjoying it at international level. I think he feels he's got a lot to give at club level. I've no doubt that he's been given a brilliant financial package to lead America and the World Cup, and I'm sure he's a very professional man. He'll be focused on that, but he does like to flirt with the media about a return to Spurs. And let's be honest, who wouldn't like to see it? We'd be lying if we says we don't want him back at some stage. Look, I think if things, I don't see him at the national American team beyond the summer. I think that's just for the World Cup. So he probably will be available after the World Cup. And if things don't go well this season, I think you would probably say that Pochettino will be the favourite to be the next Tottenham manager. So it may not be as far away as some people think. But look, as a Tottenham fan, Chris, we do have loyalty to your current manager, and the idea of Pochettino coming back means that this manager is going to fail, and it means we're going to be miserable as Tottenham fans. So look, as much as we've been critical, we are all behind Thomas Frank. Nobody wants to see Thomas Frank fail at Spurs, but he does have to learn and learn fast, because this is a big club with big expectations, and a lot of managers would love to manage at Tottenham, and there's a manager who's managed this before, knows what it's like for the fans. He understands what the fans want. He got that. I don't think I've ever been as connected with a Tottenham manager as I have with Pochettino. And Chris, the one thing I like to say is you think about Pochettino and you think about Ange to a certain extent. The one thing that worries me with Thomas Frank is 15, 20 minutes before a game, getting ready to walk out to the pitch. Does Thomas Frank inspire you in the dressing room to go out and, get on the front foot, run through brick walls? I don't know if he's got the personality to manage a top club. He's a nice man. He's a good organised coach. But I don't know if he's got the personality to succeed at a top club. I hope I'm wrong, and I hope it is successful here, because we all want to see Spurs be successful. But it does worry me, because the way the team starts games, and I'd love to be a fly on the wall, because Chris, I'm obviously very pumped up because I'm thinking about Saturday and I'm thinking about going to the game. I would love to do the team talk on Saturday for the players. They understand for them what it means to play for this club and what it would mean to get a home win against Man United. Does Thomas Frank have that same energy as we do, as a Pochettino would, or as an Ange did to a certain extent? Ange, for all his flaws, he was a very good speaker, and the players really, really liked him. Even seen it towards the end. There was a massive public backing after the Europa League final from the players, and you only seen the outpouring of emotions after the manager was sacked. Yes, there was flaws with Ange, and yes, the players didn't agree with everything he did, but they liked him as a person. You've seen some of the signs already with Xavi Simons and Van de Ven and Spence. Has Frank got everyone on board yet? I still think he has to convince some of the players and a lot of the fans.
Right, Gareth, let's quickly talk about Manchester United, because Manchester United's Bruno Fernandes has 53 Premier League assists since his debut back in Feb 2020. Only Salah 64 and De Bruyne 58 have more. what have you made of Manchester United this season? I know we've spoken about them a lot over the course of the last few weeks, certainly. As I mentioned earlier, last 4 games, 3 wins, 1 draw. This is a good period for them. What sort of game are you expecting on Saturday? And I suppose that would lead you into talking about the starting 11 that you'd like to see Spurs put out.
Look, Man United have come on for heavy criticism from the media, from ex-players, and former Man United managers. I mean, they, from every angle, Amram's had it up against them. But I do have to say, you have to give him credit for his persistence that he's going to do it his way or no way. And look, there was something admirable about Ange, as much as it was crazy at times. Amram's cut from the same cloth a bit. We're going to play my system, or I will, you get rid of me. I'm not changing for anyone. And I think there is similarities between Ange and Amram in terms of, I think a lot of the players like him. They may not agree with everything he does, and they may not agree with certain parts of the system, but I do believe they are playing for him. And even like United have had some terrible records. Amram's he's broken some terrible records as a manager, but you see the way the players interact with him and engage with him. And I do think they do like him. And it's a similar one where, if it doesn't happen this year, it may be that he's moved on, but I don't think it's because the players have down tools. Like under previous managers, Ten Hag, Solskjaer, Louis van Gaal, the German fella, Ralf Rangnick, they completely down tools under those managers. I haven't seen that with Man United. And I do think the players he's improving some of the players that are there. I think Ahmad's been brilliant, and he's signed some really good players, and Bumo and Cunha have made them a lot more of a threat than they were last season. Bruno Fernandes seems to really like him a lot, and if he's your best player, and he's got a big say in that dressing room. If he's on board, most of the players will. So United are definitely benefiting as well, Chris, from only the 1 game a week, because you can see the improvements that Aaron was making, especially going forward in the games at the weekend. So it's going to be a tough game, but the one thing I would say is Ruben Amorim is a very brave manager. United are not going to come to Spurs and play defensive football. They're going to go for it. You see with Man United games this year, they're quite high-scoring games, 4-2 against Brighton, 2-2 against Nottingham Forest, and they were still trying to get a winner, and Forest could have won it later on. Liverpool at Anfield, even at 1-1, we're not happy with a point. We're going to try and win the game, and they did.
That was a huge result, though, Gareth. That wasn't it? Because what was it? A couple of months ago, at the start of the season, their results weren't good, and I think even both of us were predicting that he would have been one of the next Premier League managers to be sacked. And this is quite a turnaround. The result when you go to a rival like that, for Manchester United to go to Liverpool and win that game was absolutely huge for them.
Yeah, it was. But they didn't sit back at Liverpool. Even when they went to Man City, they had chances and lost the game 3-0, but they created opportunities and didn't put them away, and they were caught on the counter-attack. So they didn't sit back at Man City. They didn't sit back against Liverpool away. They're not going to come to Spurs and sit back. They're going to smell blood and go to the Spurs team. They're not too sure of themselves. The home records in the league's been awful. And United will be itching to set the record straight after the Europa League final, because all those players were there, weren't they? So they'll be looking for a bit of revenge. So it's going to be a difficult game, Chris. The one thing I would say is we cannot afford to respect Man United, because they have got dangerous players. And Bumo has done us before. Cunha has done us before with at previous clubs. Sesko seems to be warming up. Bruno Fernandes is an absolute weapon. So you look at their front four, Chris, they probably have better players than us as well. So the one area they're weak is at the back. He changes his back three quite a lot. Casemiro in midfield hasn't really got legs. I think if we're going to win this game, Chris, we're going to have to score goals, because United will score. I don't see a situation. They've got too many attacking players, and the way they play football, they're going to create opportunities. So I do think it could be quite an entertaining game, as long as Spurs take part in it and don't sit back and play stiff and play for set pieces. Got to go at them, because I think if you sit back against Manchester United, Chris, you're asking for trouble. You're asking for trouble, and will be punished, because they've got too many good players not to score goals. So I would just like to see a brave Spurs team selection. You asked me about me starting 11. I would go with the exact same team that played on Tuesday. But if Kudos is fit, I would bring him on for Johnson. If Kudos isn't fit, I would stick with Brennan Johnson. That would be my team.
So you would definitely have Mawani now in the starting 11 rather than Richarlison?
Yeah, definitely. And look, my worry is I think Thomas Frank will bring Polina back in. I really do, and I think that could really, really infuriate the fan base, especially if we lose the game. I actually think, Chris, and I know it's early in his tenure, but I think if he brings Polina back in and plays with Bentancur, and he maybe moves Xavi Simons out to the left, they accommodate getting him onto a team, I think that could really lose some of the fans. And if we were to get beat, I think it would be toxic at full time, and that is my worry.
It's really interesting how you say about Spurs starting games, because do you remember? I think it was last year or the season before where Brentford just scored like 3 or 4
5 in a row
in the first minute. Was it 5 in a row in the end? Five in a row, first minute.
Yeah,
incredible. Yeah. Score prediction.
2-1 Spurs.
Yeah, I'm going to go 2-1 Spurs as well. In fact, I think this game has got a draw written all over it, but I'm just hoping for a piece of magic, something like another Van de Ven run.
Chris, I'll ask you, because you go every week. If you see 11:15, Polina and Bentancur, what would your thoughts be going into the game?
I can't see that changing, actually, Gareth. He loves that combination. He thinks that it really works in the system, the way that he wants to play. I can't see that changing. I think you're going to see that duo a lot this campaign, despite us talking about rotation and playing in all these competitions.
It's not working at home, but Chris, is it? It's not working at home, that combination.
That home form definitely needs to change. I think a lot of things need to change, but the one thing that really worries me, do you know what, Gareth? That is the least of my worries, that partnership in the midfield. My worry is the final third and the lack of creativity, particularly in that Chelsea game. That cannot happen again. And I would hope that Spurs come out very early on and take some long range shots. We don't seem to see a lot of long range shots, certainly this season at home. And test the goalkeeper, put the ball out to Kudus. Try different things, be more entertaining. It's got to happen because, like you've said, the Tottenham Stadium sometimes can seem, the amount of booing. And I spoke about this in the last couple of days as well on the channel, that the amount of booing, I think Frank has been in charge of Spurs for 5 Premier League home games. We've heard boos in 3 of them. Yeah, and that's not a good start for a manager.
No, it's not. And the worry for me is what you're saying there, right? Is I don't know if you can be an entertaining team with Polina and Bentancur in a midfield. I just don't see that as being possible. I think you need to have 2 progressive midfielders on there.
But what I'm saying to you, Gareth, is I don't think that's going to change. I think that Thomas Frank is very adamant that is exactly what he wants to do, regardless of what people like you think.
Exactly, and that is why I think there's going to be a lack of entertaining football at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. I think away from home, it's a bit more understandable, but at home, I just think setting up with those 2 as a double pivot, I think it's going to be very difficult for Xavi Simons to get service, Kudos to get service, and the only excuse, I know there's been a few players injured, like Kulusevski, like Madison. But my worry is if you persist them with those 2 players, there's only really room for one of those to come in. Simons, Kulusevski, or Madison, it's got to be, because he's not going to drop Kudos and play Kulusevski on the right. So the only thing they could do is rotate those 3 out. So I don't know how much that would change. But my worry is, Chris, that if he persists with those 2, I just think the attacking players are going to really struggle to get any kind of, anything linked together. But the one excuse that he's got is that Udogi's been injured. I do think there's a more balance when Udogi's playing at left back. And I
totally agree. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Usually help the left-sided player. And there's been a bit of link-up between Udogi and Odegaard. So that is the only out he's got maybe at the moment that I can see, that maybe how you can make it a little bit more entertaining with that double pivot. But the evidence will be on Saturday because Udogi's fit to play. So we'll see.
Yeah. Well, we've both gone for a 2-1 win. Let us know how you're feeling ahead of this game and put your score predictions in the comments section below. Right, Gareth, next up, Everton against Fulham. at the Hill Dickinson Stadium. Of course, Everton were beaten at home by Spurs for the very first time at home in their new ground. Fulham are down in 15th. Of course, they got a good result against Wolves last weekend as they were struggling for points going into that game. Everton last time out, they travelled to Sunderland, a 1-1 draw. Now, after winning 22 consecutive home league games against Fulham between 1961 and 2018, Everton are now winless in their last 4 against Fulham, drawing 1 and losing 3. How do you see this one going?
I think this is probably the home banker of the weekend. Fulham don't travel particularly well. They never really have as a club. They've always been a team that get most of their points at home. I think Everton, to be honest, were unlucky to lose 3-0, but it wasn't a 3-0 game. They were undone by set pieces, and only for Vicario, they probably could have got at least 1 goal. So it was a lot tighter than the scoreline suggested. We speak about this player every week, Chris, and he scored an unbelievable goal Monday night against Sunderland. And Jai, I think he's a real top player they've got. Brave on the ball, very good feet, and very, I mean, even Jed Spence at times, he's probably better defensively than he is going forward. Struggled at times against them. So I think Everton have a real player on their hands, and we Grealish on the other side. We spoke about this before, but they're very much back to the old Everton of being more of a flair team than they are about kind of being dogged and resilient. They still got that under Moyes with the boys at the back, but they are a bit of an easier watch. And I think the fans are enjoying watching Everton a lot more than they have in the last 5 or 6 years. So no, I think Everton are going well. That was a good point away at Sunderland. They probably should have won the game based on the chances. So no, I think Everton are in a really good moment. Fulham, great one against Wolves, but Wolves were in such a bad place. And the fact that Fulham have been poor on the road this year, I can't see anything else but an Everton one. But for anyone watching,
what's happened to Fulham?
Yeah, I was going to say, but for anyone watching, that's just Newcastle were the banker last weekend and they got beat. So don't trust me. But it's a strange one with Fulham because the last couple of seasons they've been knocking on the door of Europe, really.
Exactly.
And they just fell short. But I just think maybe lack of investment, losing some players. You know, Willian was a brilliant player for them. They've lost him. Paulinho, we know they've lost. Smith Rowe's been injured a lot, hasn't he? Jimenez is getting older. I think Muniz, who's a good striker, has been injured quite a bit for them this season. And it's strange because their main output for goals in the minute is Ryan Sessegnon, who couldn't stay fit at Spurs, but he's doing quite well at Fulham, and he done quite well last year for them. He seems to be getting a consecutive run of games now, and I think he scored last week as well against Wolves. So brilliant to see Sessegnon because there was always a player there, but it just didn't happen at Spurs for him. We had a lot of injuries and managers coming and going, and he was never really particularly favoured other than when Conte was there, and he played that back 3 system, and he played as a left wing back. But no, he's doing well at Fulham. But I think if you're relying on Sessegnon to score goals, that's a massive problem. So I just don't see them doing anything at the weekend against Everton. I think it'll be a comfortable home one.
What are you going to go for?
2-0 Everton.
Yeah, so see, I've said in previous weeks, Gareth, it's really worrying when me and you keep agreeing all the time, and we've done 2 games so far, and we've agreed on both.
Craig says that to me last week as well.
Yeah, right. Next up, West Ham United against Burnley. Now, I've spoken to a number of West Ham fans in the last couple of days, and all of them say, or they all sort of agree that they think that they're going to get relegated. And I said, I think Nuno will pull you out of this issue. And of course, they got their first win under Nuno, 3-1, beating Newcastle, who I might add, Newcastle were excellent against Spurs in the Carabao Cup, and they made 8 changes in that game and beat us comfortably. Now they're facing Burnley, West Ham against Burnley. So it's 18th against 17th. West Ham have 7 points. Burnley have 10. I suppose Nuno's team, Gareth, will have to think we're playing a newly promoted side. We're playing at home. We've got that confidence from the Newcastle game. Surely they will be having a lot more confidence now. And I tell you what, I feel like the fans will have a lot more confidence if they do get another win before the international break, because wins before the international break, and I know we haven't spoken about this yet, they're very important, aren't they, from the fans' perspective as well?
Well, it's massive. Because, Chris, the league table freezes for 2 weeks. So if you're in a good position, it looks pretty to look at. And I think it is more psychological more than anything. I mean, if you're a Spurs fan this weekend and you're sitting in the top 4, good start to the season. If you're sitting 10th, oh my God, what's going on? And we're 11 games in now. And it might be that you're only 2, 3, 4 points from jumping 6 or 7 places. But that's not how anyone looks at it. They look at their league position. So, yeah, massive week for all teams. And I think it's even bigger because it's the final international break of the year. Of course, the final one of the season will be in March. So it's non-stop football, really, now. So it's a good position to get yourself into. I suppose the next kind of time everyone will really focus on the league table after this international break will probably be Christmas Day. Where are you at on Christmas Day will probably be the next kind of marker for teams. And then, going into the new year, because we always say we break it down, don't we? These first few weeks are kind of like money groups. You play 4 games, and you play 4 games, and you play 4 games, and you try and evaluate where you are. And then there's obviously a lot of games over Christmas. You evaluate where you are Christmas Day, and then you kind of evaluate where you are in March. And they sort of call it, don't they, the running those final 9 or 10 games, and where you can finish. And are you fighting for Europe? Are you in a relegation battle? Are you in the title race? So yeah, massive, because a lot of teams, and I always say this international break is the dreaded one for managers, because it's the final opportunity where there's a break where you can kind of replace the manager and not have to worry about a game in a few days' time. Whereas if you replace a manager in 2 weeks' time, especially around December, you probably have a game every 3 days. So huge. And Chris, I'll be honest with you, I mean, I think that result last Sunday, West Ham, that is the shock of the season. I could not see anything else other than the Newcastle one, and they were 1-0 up after 4 minutes.
Yeah,
I thought this could be a demolition job. This could be, Nuno could be sacked after this, because we've seen managers come on the door, not make a difference in the first few games and get sacked already. So, I was actually worrying. I was thinking, oh my God, Nuno must be regretting. But you know what? They turned it around. Look, Newcastle were poor, but credit to West Ham, because there's been so much negativity around West Ham. They haven't had a home win since, I think, April, and we're in November now. I mean, the pressure they were under must have been incredible. But going back to this game at the weekend, I think this is more difficult because they're playing Burnley at home. A team like you says, fighting relegation, newly promoted team. West Ham are going to be expected to be on their front foot, and they're probably going to go into the game in many people's eyes as favourites. And I think West Ham could struggle to cope with that. Nuno probably has to be a bit more brave and a bit more attacking. And I think Burnley have shown this year they're quite streetwise, and they're quite good at taking points off when they're maybe settled and defensive and they can break. So I think it's a dangerous game for West Ham.
Well, before we get your score prediction, let's go through a couple of facts here. West Ham are unbeaten in their last 6 Premier League games against Burnley, winning 3 and drawing 3, having lost 4 of their previous 5 against the Clarets, winning 1. And West Ham haven't lost any of their last 11 Premier League games against Burnley when they have scored at least once in the match, winning 8 and drawing 3, since a 2-1 loss at Turf Moor back in Feb 10. I'm going to go for a 2-1 West Ham win, and I think a lot of West Ham fans will probably be changing their minds going into the international break. And I also think it's fair to say, Gareth, is that, although it didn't work out for Nuno Espirito Santo at our beloved club Tottenham, I think he's a decent manager, and I think he's going to turn that club around.
I'm not so sure. I don't know if West Ham are savable. I think he's a good manager. I think he's good at a certain level. But I don't think unless they do some serious business in January, I don't think they've got the physicality, the energy, the legs to stay up. I really don't. I think there's other teams better equipped, Burnley being one of them. Might not have the quality of a Jared Bowen or a Somerville or a Paqueta, but I think they're probably better structured and better suited to competing for games, because we shouldn't get carried away with the Newcastle game. It was kind of thinking afterwards when we hung our hats on Newcastle that Newcastle have been very, very poor away from home. Eddie Howe spoke about that a few times, that there's a massive difference between Newcastle at home and Newcastle away this season. So we'll have to watch Newcastle away from home over the next few weeks to see if that record gets fixed. But I'm going to go against you on this one, Chris. I I'm going to go. You says they're on West Ham having lost to Burnley in 6. I'm going to say that record's going to be broken. But I'm also going to stick with that record that you mentioned. When West Ham score against Burnley, they don't lose. I'm going to go for a 1-0 Burnley 1. West Ham don't score in this game.
Okay. Let me just ask you quickly before we move on to the next game. Do you like the fact that we've got London rivals like West Ham in the Premier League, or do you just want to see them get relegated and go down?
No, I look forward to the derby games, I have to say. It's great. We'd all be laughing at West Ham for one season, but we'd miss West Ham in the Premier League, in terms of the games. But the only thing I would say is you wouldn't miss that stadium that they're in. I mean, even their fans, I think, would torture. I think they would burn it down if they could get away with it. I don't think they particularly like it either. I don't think that move has helped West Ham at all. It's not a nice stadium to play in. The fans don't particularly like it. The atmosphere is always dead, and even for away fans, it's probably the worst day out of the season. But in terms of the rivalry, and look, it's fair to say that West Ham look at Spurs differently to how Spurs look at West Ham. Spurs' main rivals is Arsenal. Chelsea look at Spurs differently. Spurs don't like Chelsea, but Chelsea are Spurs' main rival. West Ham, Spurs are their main rival. It's for us, it's Spurs Arsenal. So West Ham are third in the food chain as far as I'm concerned. No, I would still miss the Spurs West Ham games, particularly at home.
Right, next up is the 5:30 kickoff at the Stadium of Light. Sunderland take on Arsenal on Saturday. Now, Sunderland, surprisingly, are fourth in the Premier League table. They have done remarkably well since being promoted to the Premier League. They have 18 points. Arsenal, as I've mentioned already, they are sitting top of the Premier League table with 25 points. So far this campaign, Sunderland have scored 12 goals. Arsenal have scored 18. As Gareth mentioned earlier, 8 consecutive clean sheets from Arsenal, and they are not conceding many shots either. Last time out for Sunderland, they played at home and drew 1-1 against Everton, and the week before, or the game before that, was them beating Chelsea 2-1 away at Stamford Bridge. Fantastic scenes at Stamford Bridge, I must say. Now, Sunderland are winless in their last 15 Premier League games against Arsenal, drawing 5 and losing 10 since a 1-0 home victory in November 2009. Granit Xhaka, 2 words I'm going to say to you here, Gareth. This is a massive game for him.
Yeah, we spoke about that, didn't we, at the top of the show? He will be out to prove a point. He will look at players like we said, Jorginho. He was there Jorginho replaced him. Norgard has then replaced Jorginho. Are they any better players than Granit Xhaka? I don't think so. So he'll probably think he could have done a few more years at Arsenal. I think what's very, very impressive about Xhaka, and look, we didn't like him when he was at Arsenal, but I think he is one of those players that wears his heart on his sleeve. I think he is one of those players that hurts him when the team he's playing for is not winning matches. And I think the Sunderland fans have really taken to him. From what I hear, in the dressing room, he's absolutely brilliant. Players, a lot of new players, and he's galvanized that group, and they're not a nice team to play against Sunderland, and I think that's always something they admire about the players and the team and the manager. So Arsenal are going to be in for a tough game. We know from watching the documentary how passionate Sunderland fans are on Netflix. Even when they were in League One, they were pumped up for games. They're brilliant fans, and they are going to be so excited about this because they probably can't believe the position that they're in, but I guarantee they're going into this game, despite the form that Arsenal run, thinking they can get a result because they went to Chelsea and won. And at home they will feel it at the minute, a bit like Arsenal, who are looking invincible with this record they have. But Sunderland will feel at home they can be invincible because no one has went up there and won yet. So it's a very interesting game. But let's not sugarcoat it, Chris. It's a massive game for Arsenal. If they can win this game, this is going to set the fears amongst the rest of the Premier League, not just Spurs fans, because Man City and Liverpool are under serious pressure to get a win against each other. A draw wouldn't really suit any of them because it means Arsenal are pulling even further clear. So Arsenal could be sitting pretty on Sunday evening looking at that league table for the next 2 weeks going, oh my God, we are 9 points clear here. And we still have players to come back, like Odegaard, like Matchweek. Saka's just back. Havertz is coming back. Gyökeres has got injured there. So, I mean, the one thing you have to say about Arsenal, they find ways to win games, Chris, without even being at their best. And that is always a worrying sign if you're looking at them as a rival. When teams are winning games, despite not being at their best consistently, then it's always a sign of a team that can go far. So I think not just Spurs fans, I think the whole of the Premier League will be behind Sunderland on Saturday evening at 5:30. And let's hope Sunderland can do something against Arsenal. But I just have a nagging feeling that Arsenal will find a way.
Yeah, we will certainly be supporting Sunderland
on
on
going
Saturday.
to the game. I'm going to obviously go to the Spurs game on Saturday, but I'm guarantee the bricklayers will be absolutely packed if Spurs can win. And I'm sure there'll be a few people might even be wearing Sunderland tops, supporting them against Arsenal.
Gareth, when you talk about Arsenal's depth, who are the players that if they got injured, they simply cannot replace in those areas? Who are they really going to miss if they suddenly get key injuries, suspensions, or any other issues for that matter?
I think there's three that stand out for me for different reasons. The one player I think they would really miss that they have no real replacement for is Declan Rice. I think he is probably, now that Rodri's been injured a lot, he's probably the best in that role around. He's very good as well. From his set piece delivery. At times he rarely misses but it almost reminds you of David Beckham, the way he whips the ball in. Obviously nowhere near the level of a Beckham. He was probably the best crosser we've ever seen in the Premier League. But he's not far off that. His corners, his free kicks, we've seen so many of them, and he puts them on the areas, or he puts them on heads, that it makes it so difficult for. I mean, there's no doubt, Chris, that teams are working tirelessly to try and stop Arsenal from set pieces, but the delivery is that good at times. It makes it very, very difficult to stop. Then another player they would really miss, and it's down to the set pieces, is probably Gabriel. I think defensively they could cope without Gabriel, but I think they would really miss Gabriel from their set pieces because he's probably the best defender or best player at attacking a ball in the air around at the moment, and you can see that with his goals. And the third one's probably the goalkeeper, David Raya. I think Kepa had a decent season at Bournemouth last year, but he's nowhere near as good as David Raya. So I think if you keep those three players fit all season, it's going to be very, very difficult for teams to reel Arsenal on. I think they can cope without Odegaard, they can cope without Saka, they can cope without Gyökeres, Havertz, all those attacking players, because the top and bottom of it is, Chris, really, they only need one. At the minute, they only need one goal to win games. And that has been proven over a number of games now, that they don't have to score 2 and 3 goals to win games. And that's the difference with Man City, Liverpool. They're having to outscore teams most weeks. Arsenal can win a game 1-0. And that'll be the challenge for Sunderland. Sunderland, I think, are going to have to score first in this game to get anything out of it. I think if Arsenal go 1-0 up, they kind of remind me of that Mourinho Chelsea team the first time around when they went 1-0 up, game over. Unless a freak goal happens, you just can't see a team penetrating them because they're so well organised, so well structured. And look, you have to give Arteta credit, but you also have to give the board credit. They've backed Arteta when they've been under pressure. They part ways a few times. And the way it's looking at the minute, as painful it's going to be for Spurs, it looks like it's going to pay off.
They've spent a lot of money, though, Gareth. I think that's fair to say. Who is a better defensive partnership, would you say? Saliba and Gabriel, or Van de Ven and Romero?
I think that from a defensive point of view, it's hard to argue that they're not the best central pairing in Europe, because they're not conceding goals, they're not conceding shots. Yes, they've got Declan Rice in front of them, but Spurs have Pellegrini in front of them, who's been winning all these tackles. So I think on the ball, we probably have 2 better players. I think Van de Ven can do things that no other centre-half can. I think Romero's very good on the ball as well. But I think those two as a partnership at the minute are a hard force. And I think up until maybe 2 years ago, everyone viewed Saliba as the more important one, but probably now Gabriel. I think he's improved a lot. And I think that weapon he's got from set pieces is, I mean, every ball goes into the box, he looks a threat. And if he's not scoring, he's causing trouble. So Romero and Van de Ven aren't far behind. But I think those two at the minute, it's hard to argue that they're not the best around, not just England, but Europe.
Gareth, you've mentioned great fans on this channel over the last couple of months since we've been doing these Premier League predictions each week. Who aren't the good fans? Who are the worst fans in the Premier League, would you say? And why?
It's going to sound biased, but I would put Arsenal there.
You're going to go with who?
I think I would put Arsenal on that bracket. I think I've never seen a fan base that can't accept defeat without having to blame somebody else but the players or the manager. I mean, that's been a continuous theme with Arsenal, even under Wenger, referees, or under this new regime. It's VAR are trying to stop us. And then it was, I think, this latest thing about the game against Crystal Palace in the League Cup. They're complaining about the fixtures. So they're trying to stop us. There's no conspiracy against Arsenal. There's no conspiracy against any team. Referees make mistakes; they're human. But I think Arsenal fans are very, very vocal when something goes against them. So I would put them on there. If we're going purely on atmospheres and stuff, I mean, and I don't think they'll mind me saying this. I think Fulham are very much a relaxing club. You never really see Craven Cottage bouncing the even their away end lums are but reserved. They're very reserved fans. But you know what? I like Fulham as a football club, so that's probably why. People like them because they're not on your fist. They're very reserved people. Yeah, West Ham too. West Ham's home fans are dreadful. I mean, there's more white seats than there is Clark and Blue at the minute. I mean, there are empty seats everywhere.
Right, Gareth, let's get into this prediction. Sunderland against Arsenal. Before we do, let's have a look at some of the facts here. Sunderland haven't won any of their last 23 Premier League games against sides starting the day in the top 4 of the table, drawing 7 and losing 16 since a 2-1 win over second-place Chelsea back in April 2014. Sadly, I think Arsenal are going to win this one, and I'm going to go 2-0.
Yeah, I'm going to go 1-0 to Arsenal.
Yes, right. Lastly, for Saturday's fixtures, and I think this is going to probably be the longest episode we've ever recorded on one of these editions, Gareth. We better keep these answers a little bit shorter. Chelsea.
We done an hour on Spurs, didn't we?
Chelsea against Wolves. Of course, these two sides met recently at Molineux, with Chelsea beating them in the League Cup. Now, Chelsea, of course, just beat Spurs in the Premier League 1-0. They're up to 7th. Wolves, as we mentioned earlier, are sitting bottom of the table, 20th. They are winless. They have got 2 draws and 8 defeats. Who do you think is going to take over there permanently at Molineux? Who's the right man? Who's going to be the right fit?
Well, it looks like they've identified Rob Edwards as the man they want. Whether he leaves Middlesbrough, who are going well in the Championship, is another question. Because I says to you, Chris, there's a big argument they say that Middlesbrough are more likely to be in the Premier League next year than Wolves. And I look at Wolves at the minute, Chris, and I don't know if anyone can save them. I think this is probably just their time to go down. They've been flirting with it for years. They've sold their best players, financial problems.
Yeah.
And do you know what? In a way, it might be the best thing for them long term that they do go down and then maybe try and bounce back and reshape the club and maybe get the wages trimmed down. And look, it's not, people probably going screaming at the TV going, how can relegation be a good thing? But is it going to be any different next year, Wolves, if they stay up? Are they going to be in another dogfight again? More players leaving the club? The one thing I'd say, I think this time, Chris, they probably haven't got any star players that they've had before that's been able to keep them up. Like the biggest one, Cunha. He's a match winner. I don't really look at that group now and think there's many match winners on them. So I think it's going to be a complete struggle. Whoever comes in now at Wolves, they try and keep them up. And if you're a manager now and you're looking at where they are in the table, 2 points from 10 games, has anyone ever stayed up after 2 points from 10 games? I mean, I'd love to know it. I don't think so. So I mean, it's grim. And going to Chelsea away, I mean, maybe they can look at Sunderland's result. Well, they won there, but it'd be a big upset if Wolves went there and won on Saturday night. But Chelsea are an unknown. We spoke about them last week, Chris. We says you don't know what you're going to get from Chelsea. They lose to Sunderland, beat Spurs, and draw with Qarabağ, and that's probably Chelsea under Maresca and under this new model of Todd Boehly in a nutshell. Can beat anyone, but also can lose to anyone. So, look, it's not beyond the realms that the Wolves can't get a result. But I don't believe they're going to have a manager in place for this game. So, it's a big ask. Ask entirely.
Well, this is an interesting one. Wolves have picked up just 2 points in 10 Premier League games this season, drawing 2, losing 8, as we mentioned. Every single Premier League side with 2 or fewer points at this stage have been relegated. Man City in 1996, Sunderland in 2017, Sheffield United in 2021, and Norwich in 2022. And Chelsea have scored 5+ goals in 4 different Premier League games against Wolves, including a 6-2 win at Molineux last season. Against so sides have the Blues done so more in the competition, while it's also been the most Wolves have conceded 5+ against an opponent. I think this game's got goals in it. I'm going to go for a 3-0 Chelsea win. Also, Gareth, before you do give me the score prediction, pick out 1, 2, perhaps even 3 players that you've been impressed with in the Chelsea side.
I mean, the obvious one, and he hasn't actually played a lot, but he looks a real top talent, Esteval. I think he is going to be a superstar, to be honest, looking at him. He scored again on Wednesday night against Quarterback. Scored that winner against Liverpool a few weeks back. And I think there's a real top player in there. Difficult because I think Cole Palmer, they rely on him a lot. He's obviously not been fit recently. I think when he comes back, Chelsea will look a lot better. Caicedo, I mean, the development of Caicedo has been incredible. We knew he was a good player at Brighton. Had an awful start at Brighton, an awful start at Chelsea. Big price tag. Maybe he was struggling to deal with that, but right now he's as good as anyone in that role. We spoke about Declan Rice. Caicedo would probably be an hour contender for being the best player in that role as well. So Chelsea have a lot of talent, Chris. There's no doubt in that. But I think it's difficult for the manager because he's trying to work out his best team, and they do have a fair few injuries as well. They be fair to him, but I think Chelsea are we spoke about them at the start of the season, Christian. You asked me, will they title contenders? And I kind of says that Chelsea are going to be up and down this season. And their form shows you that. They're good 1 week, poor the next week. No real consistency there. I think they'll be in the round fighting for those Champions League positions, but no higher. But I think when Cole Palmer comes back, you'll probably see a bit more of a consistent Chelsea.
What's your score prediction?
I'm going to go 3-1 Chelsea.
Right, let's move on to the Sunday games. 2 p.m. Aston Villa take on Bournemouth. Of course, both of these sides played away from home last time out and both lost. Villa losing 2-0 at Liverpool and Bournemouth losing 3-1 away at City. Aston Villa are 11th, Bournemouth are 5th. And Aston Villa are unbeaten in the last 5 Premier League games against Bournemouth, winning 3 and drawing 2, having lost 4 in a row against the Cherries before this. It's going to be an interesting one. Can Bournemouth continually and consistently pick up points, Gareth, to get a European spot? Because, we've spoken a number of times about the great job that Andoni Iraola has done there. Can he get Bournemouth in Europe this season?
I think if he does that, it will be a great parting gift, because I think from what we've seen of Iraola, this will be his last season at Bournemouth. I think his stock is that high. And Jimmy Carragher spoke about, Nuno, and he spoke about Frank, that transition to a top club. I think it's easier for Iraola because of how his teams play. He's very brave, very possession-based, great patterns of play, can lose good players and still make it work. You think about the players Bournemouth have lost, and they look just as good as they were last year. I think he's done an unbelievable job. I think that performance that Bournemouth put in against Man City on Sunday will further back up the belief of, we know that clubs are always contingency planning ahead. I think anyone watching that from a recruitment point of view will look at how Bournemouth set up at Man City against a red hot Erling Haaland, and this is, we're going to play our way, we're going to go about it our way. And Bournemouth are very much in the game, created a lot of opportunities. Yes, they gave up chances as well. And look, they ran on the Erling Haaland, who looks, as we say, unstoppable at the moment. So there was no disgrace in losing that game to Man City. But I was really impressed with the approach, because I think a lot of teams would have went to Man City. When you look at the difference in wages and star quality status from Bournemouth's team to Man City's team, and played a negative style of play, pragmatic. No, he didn't allow that, and I think it was so impressive. He's very much a manager who is risk for reward, not pragmatic. He goes, he takes risks to try and get those rewards, and I think he's one of those managers. He still maintains a good balance. It's rare you see Bournemouth getting absolutely tanked. I mean, I can't think of the last time Bournemouth got completely battered 4 or 5-0. And most teams have one or two of those this season. Even some of the top teams have them. So kind of reminds me back to when Pochettino was at Southampton, and I liked a lot about what Pochettino was doing at Southampton before he came to Spurs.
Yeah, good point. Yeah,
very impressive the way he set Southampton up, and I kind of get those vibes with Areola. So no, Bournemouth fans will be worried because they know probably where they are in the food chain, but they just have to enjoy it for now. And I mean, if I was a Bournemouth fan, they must go on to every game at the minute, Chris, thinking they can get a result. I mean, and for Bournemouth fans, they feel like that. Must be an unbelievable feeling from where they were when they come under the Premier League and they got relegated after a few seasons, bounced back with Scott Parker, didn't they? And from where they were when Scott Parker left, Gary O'Neill comes on. Few fans were unsure when Gary O'Neill got sacked because he did a decent job, and Paul Foley, the owner, identified Areola. He says this boy is going to be the next big thing to come out of Europe. And he had a nightmare start. I think after 10 games, they hadn't won a game. And there was people questioning the decision. And then, boom, the explosion from Bournemouth from then. I think if they pulled up a stat on Monday Night Football, it wasn't last week. It was the week before. Since Areola's first victory, I think Bournemouth are 5th or 6th in the Premier League for overall points since that first one. Incredible. And that was during Ange's first season. So that is, you would say at this stage now, like the equivalent of about 76 games, which is the equivalent of about 2 seasons. Bournemouth are averaging around 5th or 6th in the league table. So this isn't just a one season off. This is consistency, and this is losing top players. Look at the players they've lost. Kerkez goes to Liverpool, top club. Housen goes to PSG, top club. And the other centre half went to Real Madrid. I mean, we're talking about 3 clubs that are going to be competing to win the Champions League, and they're all starting for their respective teams. Housen went to Real Madrid, and Zabarni went to PSG, and they're all starting for their respective teams they've went to. And they've lost those players, and they're still sitting really well in the Premier League. So, I think Bournemouth are a very, very good shout for Europe this year. I think it would actually be more of a surprise, Chris, if they didn't get into Europe now because of what they've proven to people. And I think it would be a great way for Bournemouth and Areola to part, because look, there may be an element of maybe he would want to take them into Europe, but I think he will have that many top offers. It'll be impossible to turn. I think he could have a pick of a few clubs, because if a few of the top teams underperform and sack their managers in the summer, he'll be, if not first choice, he'll be in the shortlist for all those jobs. So, if it didn't work out with Frank, and we've spoken about this a number of times, he will be up there as one of my top choices to come on.
Yeah, I agree. Previous meetings in all competitions, played 11. Aston Villa have won 5, Bournemouth have won 4, and the other 2 finished as a draw. I actually think this one's going to be a draw. I'm going to go 2-2.
Villa are at home, aren't they?
Yep.
Yeah. I'm going to go for Bournemouth. They bounce back. I just think Bournemouth are a better team than Aston Villa. I think if Bournemouth play their football, I think they'll be too good for Aston Villa. I'm going to go for a 2-1 Bournemouth 1.
Right, next up, Brentford take on Newcastle in at the GTEC Community Stadium. Brentford are currently in 12th, Newcastle in 13th. It's officially a mid-table clash, this one, Gareth. What have you made of Brentford under Andrews? And, of course, we've touched on Newcastle already. Of course, last time out, losing at London Stadium against West Ham. Brentford lost last time out as well against Crystal Palace 2-0 away, and also Brentford have won just one of their 8 Premier League games against Newcastle, drawing 1 and losing 6. That was a 4-2 victory in this exact fixture last season.
Yeah, it's an interesting game, this one. I think Brentford, it's funny with Brentford because if he didn't know any better, he would still think maybe Thomas Frank's there, because all the things that Thomas Frank has done, it's almost as if Keith Andrews has watched it and added. But Arne Slot last year at Liverpool, he didn't change what was working that well too much, and Liverpool only won the league. He made his little tweaks, they improved them maybe defensively, and they would only won the league. I think Andrews is very, very smart management when you think about it, Chris. Not trying to change too much too quickly. He's respected the job that Thomas Frank's done. And again, a bit like we said with Bournemouth, players that Brentford have lost, the manager who's been there for such a long time, it just seems as if it's been a smooth transition. And you have to give Keith Andrews a lot of credit for that, because a lot of managers may have found that a very, very difficult job. You think about the transfer saga going on the whole summer with Jon Vissa, and he eventually moves on deadline day. He had a deal as manager, and unbelievable what Brentford have done. The home form, and we've always said about Brentford, the reason they do so well in the Premier League is their home form is very, very strong, and their home form this season has been excellent. They've had some big scalps already at home. I think in the second half of the season it'll be more difficult, because I think Brentford have played all the top teams at home, so they've got to go to all those teams in the second half of the season. So I think it is important for Brentford that they get themselves a good cushion, because I think the second half of the season will be more difficult. They probably won't pick up as many points, but I still think they're going to be okay. And as I say, I can't, and it's brilliant to see as an Irishman, Keith Andrews, an Irish manager, doing really well in the Premier League. So Brentford, I've got a Brentford hat on me most weeks, hoping they do well. And look, it's a funny game, because Newcastle have been so poor away from home, and Brentford have been so good at home, that the stats will all point to a Brentford won. But if you look at the two squads, Newcastle have much more talent. So I think it'll be a very, very good game, this. And Eddie Howe, I think there's a lot to admire. We spoke about Eddie Howe, Chris, and I've said to you already, I think he's a shoo-in to be the next England manager if he wants it. I think the way he speaks, the honesty, there's a lot of managers come out after a poor performance and they'll make excuses. Eddie Howe doesn't. And I think there's something to admire about that. He'll say when his team's not been good enough. And I think that's always a sign of a very strong manager. And he doesn't go overboard on his players, but he does be critical of them if they haven't performed. And I think that points to a strong leadership in the dressing room from him, and a real respect from Newcastle's players to him. So you can see, and look, Eddie Howe's been in that job for quite a long time, and it's rare now managers be in a job for 4 or 5 years. He's been there quite some time, and you think about modern day management, it's an achievement being in the job that long. And Newcastle isn't an easy job. There's high expectations there. He won the trophy last year. They're back in the Champions League, and let's be honest, Newcastle are aiming higher. They just don't want to be in the Champions League and compete. They want to be one in the Premier League, one in the Champions League, with them owners. So, and the fact that Eddie Howe has been trusted with that, again, shows you the faith they have in him, because there's a lot of managers around Europe would love a crack at Newcastle. We spoke about great fans, Chris. Newcastle, we were up there a few weeks ago in the Cup. Look at this. Sell out at home in a League Cup game on a Wednesday night. So that shows you what they're like. And we've seen them in the Championship, sold out. Yeah. So they're up there as one of the top fans around. So there is pressure with that job. But Eddie Howe is just very, very cool customer, very good tactician. And what I like about Eddie Howe is he's very flexible. He's not afraid to go on the front foot one week, and he's not afraid to go to Liverpool or Arsenal. Do you know what? We'll be a little bit more pragmatic this week, but we'll still be a threat going forward. And I think when you have them strings to your bow, you're always going to be regarded as a top manager. But interesting comments this week. He says that the away form has got to improve, and he expects to see better away performances, because if you look at the home form, they're blitzing teams at home. Look at the Champions League, they're winning games quite comfortably at home. So huge game for Newcastle, but I'm erring on the side of a score draw, Chris. So I'm going to go for a 1-1.
I wrote down 1-1, and I've just changed it to 0-0. After all that, what you just said about both teams, I've gone for a 0-0. So we're going to move on quickly. Crystal Palace take on Brighton. Now, I know we are part of the Oliver Glasner fan club. Now, both teams last time out won their respective games. Palace beating Brentford 2-0 at home, and Brighton winning 3-0 against Leeds at home. Now, Crystal Palace at the moment are sat in 9th. Brighton are in 10th. It's really interesting, and I suppose we should point this out again, Gareth. These league positions after 10 games doesn't really mean a lot, does it? Because when I mentioned earlier, Spurs 2 points away from being second, 2 points away or 2 points above being 11th. So this league table can, twist and turn very quickly, can't it, in the next few match weeks?
Yeah, I think, Chris, what you're seeing in the Premier League is it's become so competitive with these top managers, the Glazers, the Eddie Howe's, the Areolas, the Thomas Franks when he was at Brentford really suited him. The way he had Brentford playing, and they were always capable of taking points off the best teams. You look at this Crystal Palace team, they could take points off anyone on their day. Bournemouth couldn't do it. Brentford at home this year have been taking points off the big boys. Everton have improved, and that's not even mention some of the other top clubs around. So I think there's probably, you exclude the big three, as we say at the minute, probably Man City, Liverpool, and Arsenal. And Man City and Liverpool have had their issues with some of these teams, but they are still more consistent than the rest. As anyone, Chris, could probably finish from 4th to 10th out of all these teams, really. Not a lot between them. You look at Crystal Palace's players, some of the players Bournemouth have, not as a complete 11, but there's players in the Bournemouth team like Semenyo, who could probably get onto any team in the league. There's players at Palace like Sarr, who's been banging goals on for fun, could probably get onto most teams. So all these teams have threats. And I just think it makes for such a really competitive, entertaining league. And look, we spoke about Glazner a lot on this show. And we said last week it was really important that he got back to winning ways. And Palace got back to winning ways because after that unbeaten run, they had a little bit of a dip. And we know they're probably struggling with the squad size playing in Europe. It's a big ask. But that was a big 3 points at home against Brentford last week. And that'll be hopefully this kickstart a new run for them and try and go on and pick up more points. But this will not be an easy game, Chris. It won't be.
What are you going to go for?
Palace, home one. I'm going to go for a 2-0 Palace one.
Yeah, I've done 2-1. Right. Next up, Gareth. Nottingham Forest take on Leeds. What major changes have you seen from Ange Postecoglou, his short time at Forest, to now Sean Dyche? What major changes have you seen for perhaps the Nottingham Forest fans to feel a little bit more confident about staying up in the Premier League? They're sat in 19th at the moment. Leeds United are 16th. And do you see a lot from Leeds to tell you that they will be staying up and being in the Premier League next year? I know it's very early on, but when you are a newly promoted side, it's very important to pick up points, give good performances, score goals. Have they got enough firepower?
Well, that's $1 million question for a lot of promoted clubs, isn't it, Chris? Have they got the quality? And you have to be able to score goals, and Leeds are not scoring enough goals. Exclude that one they had away at Wolves a number of weeks ago. They scored 3 goals. Every other game has been a struggle. They score goals. They've had a lot of blanks, and they're a bit like Burnley, aren't they? Where you feel they have to keep a clean sheet to get a result, and that puts a lot of pressure on the players. Now they've shown examples that they can do it, but can you do it? 2 out of every 4 weeks, say. Can you get 2 results out of every 4? Because that's what it's going to take probably to stay up. I do think, exclude Wolves and West Ham, I think from 18th up, there's a few teams that are going to be very close together. I think the points tally to stay up, they finish 17th will be a lot higher than it's been in previous seasons, because I think from 18th, 17th, 16th, 15th, it'll be quite tight. So you could see potentially going towards the wire where maybe teams are fighting to the very last day. For us, Chris, very early days, they say there's been much difference. The biggest difference is they're picking up results. Certainly, they beat Porto in the Europa League. I know they're in action. They're in action in the Europa League again this week. They lost quite convincingly at Bournemouth away. But look, Bournemouth have been beating everybody at home, so maybe you can't read too much into that.
Yeah.
I watched the game against Man United last week because in Ireland here we have a 3:00 televised game every week. It's on Premier Sports Ireland, and that was a 3:00 game, so I watched it. It was a very entertaining game, but I have to say, in the first half, United could have been out of sight. and that looks like it could have been a very, very different game. Forest then hit them with 2 goals back to back. And I have to say, United kind of gift wrapped them the goals per defending more than it was great Forest play. United get an equaliser and we're pushing for a winner towards the end. I think Fernandes had the post and Casemiro had a header off the line. So I think in the end it was a great point for Forest because on the balance of play they probably should have lost the game. And I think at the minute the biggest difference between, I think, and Ange had no look at Forest. I mean, some of the games they should never have lost 2-0 up at Swansea. Crazy 6 minutes they blew it. The game against Sunderland at home, Chris Wood should have had a hat-trick game, but like Spurs the other night. If you combine Miani and Richarlison's chances, which were easier to score than miss, Chris Wood had a very similar game against Sunderland at home when they lost 1-0. He's 3 gilt-edged chances, and he should have put them away. And if you think back to Ange's last game against Chelsea, the first half, Forest could have been 3 up. They could have been out of sight, and they were punished in the second half. So I think Ange can count himself a bit unlucky. I think Forest have been slightly more fortunate under Sean Dyche. But I think this will be a big game. I think you'll know more about Forest after this game. Because I think if Leeds were to turn them over, Chris, you go, well, has that much really changed under Dyche, Ange? Big game for Forest at home. They've got to win this. I think if Leeds were to go and turn them over, you'd be very, very worried about Forest because it'll be the third manager that's struggling to win games at home this season. Nuno turned over at home by West Ham. Ange couldn't win a game. And if Leeds are going and turning Forest over, that will be a massive, massive worry for Forest fans.
I'm actually going to go for a home win, a 1-0 Forest win. What are you going to go for?
Snap. 1-0 Forest.
Right. Lastly is the last game of before the international break, and it's Manchester City against Liverpool. A huge game for both clubs. I expect the Arsenal team and all the Arsenal fans will be watching this game as well, hoping probably for a draw. Man City at the moment are second. Liverpool are currently third. Man City have 19 points. Liverpool have 18 points. Both teams have won their last 2 games in all competitions. Man City beating Swansea 3-1 away in the League Cup, and then the game that I mentioned earlier, beating Bournemouth 3-1 at the Etihad in the Premier League. And then for Liverpool, they beat Aston Villa 2-0 at Anfield in the Premier League, and most recently a 1-0 win at Anfield in the Champions League. A good week for both clubs. So how do you see this one going, Gareth? Is it?
Yeah.
It's always such an entertaining game, isn't it?
Yeah, and Man City, of course, beat Dortmund 4-1 as well in the Champions League. So they're coming in pumped up after that as well. So, I mean, City have had a brilliant week when you think about it. Liverpool, a brilliant week. I think, as you pointed out, they've had 3 wins out of 3 in the last week. 2 wins out of 2. Yeah. And they will be full of confidence going into this game because Liverpool seem to have found their steel again. Villa have a lot of attacking players, couldn't score. Real Madrid, a lot of attacking talent, couldn't score. And I think in Liverpool's case, it's not just winning games, it's the way they won both games. They were convincing winners against Aston Villa, and they were convincing winners against them. Only for Courtois, Liverpool would have won the game by 3 or 4-0. They were much, much better and much more like the Liverpool we remember from last year. But I think this is a massive test for Liverpool because I think the form that Erling Haaland's on, it makes it a test for every team. The way I would put it, Chris, is Man City at the minute are probably starting games 1-0 up with Haaland, because it's just unlikely that he won't score. He gets a chance, he scores. He just does not miss at the moment. And if you watch the game on Sunday against Bournemouth, he was the difference between the 2 teams. If Erling Haaland had been in the Bournemouth team, Bournemouth probably would have won the game. And that's a big compliment to Bournemouth. But it's a worry for Man City, Chris, that Pep has never been a manager that relied on individuals. And he's never relied on anyone. And he had players like Messi, Xavi, Iniesta, but they were a team, this Man City team at the minute, whilst they have a lot of talented players, if anything happens to Erling Haaland, you're wondering where the goals come from. So, huge that he stays fit. And I think Man City do come on as favourites. Liverpool's last 2 games were at home. We know, even when they're struggling at home, Liverpool can raise their game at Anfield. Different challenge going away from home against the Man City team with Haaland in this form. And Another player that's found a bit of form recently, which is good news for you, Chris, as an England fan, is Phil Foden. There's a lot of talk about him. Will he be back in the England squad? Which is probably being announced tomorrow, I would imagine. It's usually announced before the final weekend, before an international break. So I would imagine that's being announced tomorrow. A lot of calls for him to come back in. Interesting call. He's got Bellingham. Will he come back in? Because he's played a lot more games. I mean, I know we're getting sidetracked here, but the options that Thomas Tuchel has for England compared to the options that Ireland have, I mean, it's incredible. But no, he will be keen to make an impression because I'm sure Thomas Tuchel will probably be at the game as well. He goes to a game like this, especially when it's two teams playing each other of this level. But what a way to end the weekend. From our point of view, I really hope that Spurs are going on with 3 points. We can enjoy watching the Man City and Liverpool game because we know they're two very attacking teams. And you've probably got the stats in front of you, Chris, but these games usually have a lot of goals on them. And you can't see anything different because I think both teams' strengths are scoring goals as opposed to being defensive. So I think we're in for a cracking game on Sunday. Let's just hope that Arsenal maybe drop points on Saturday so we can enjoy it a little bit better.
I know you've mentioned Erling Haaland a couple of times on this stream so far. Man City's Erling Haaland has netted 98 goals in 107 Premier League appearances. If he scores a brace in this game, he will become the fastest player to score 100 goals in the Premier League, with Alan Shearer the current quickest to 100 in 124 games. Manchester City lost both Premier League meetings with Liverpool last season, as many defeats as they suffered in their previous 12 against them, winning 4 and drawing 6. They last lost more consecutively against the Reds between March 2015 and December 2016, which was 4. And Manchester City have won 10 of their last 12 Premier League games against reigning champions. They're always up for the big ones. Drawing 1 and losing 1, most recently a 4-1 victory against Liverpool at Anfield back in February 2021. And that, of course, must stretch back a fair time because Man City have won the Premier League so many times. Gareth, I know you say about goals. I think there's going to be one goal in this, and I'm going to go to the home side. I think Man City are going to get it 1-0.
Interesting you say about that because I knew Haaland was quite close to the 100. I remember checking a few weeks ago and he was on 94. Like, it's just
amazing stats.
He's now at 98. And I believe he has 16 games in. They break the record, and 17 games they level it. So I think Haaland's record is definitely, and Shearer's record's gone. It's a record waiting to be broken in time. And I'm actually going to say, when we break it this weekend, I'm actually going for a big Man City 1. I'm going to go for an Erling Haaland brace and a Man City 3-0 1.
3-0. Wow. Okay, right. As per usual, I know this is match week 11. I think all the other 10 shows that we've done, I've always asked you, have you changed your mind on the Premier League winners? So give me a quick prediction. Premier League winners, who's going to finish in the top 4 or 5, and who's going to be relegated?
Oh, Chris. I didn't want to get to this point, but we have to be honest. We can't be on here and we can't be being a laughing stock. This is a brilliant channel. We have to be seen as being realists as well as having a bit of banter.
Yeah, so I'm going to go for Man City.
I think I'm going to. I said Liverpool, even when they were struggling a bit, but I think they struggled that badly that I don't think they'll win it. I think there's only 2 teams that can win it. I don't think Liverpool. Yes, I don't think they'll be as poor as they've been, but I do think away from home they're going to struggle. I think defensively they're vulnerable. I think Van Dijk has lost. He's still a top player, but I don't think he's the Van Dijk of old. And I think Konaté's heads in Spain. I think he's going to move on when his contract expires to Real Madrid. And here, look, Real Madrid have this brilliant record now of picking top players up for next to nothing when their contracts run out. Mark Gahey could be another one as well they watch, but I think there's only 2 teams that can win it. But my worry is that 1 is Haaland's form sustainable, and 2, can he stay injury free all season, because he does pick up injuries at times. So I think I have to say, reluctantly, they're going to win it. Man City are going to finish 2nd. Liverpool 3rd. And Newcastle 4th. And if we're going based on what we've seen so far in the Champions League, it looks nailed on already that we're going to have 5 English teams in the Champions League because they're winning. The points tallies are going up and up every week. It looks nailed on that there'll be a 5th spot. I'm going to say that Spurs are going to get that 5th spot.
Okay. And the bottom 3?
Wolves, West Ham, and Leeds.
Not Burnley?
No, I think I've seen more from Burnley that gives me more confidence they can stay up because I think they're harder to beat than Leeds.
Okay.
But
Gareth, thank you.
Is that I would worry for Forest if Sean Dyche doesn't if they can't get on a run the next few weeks. I would worry for them because the European football could catch up with them as well.
Yeah, I think that Sean Dyche will make a dramatic difference at Forest, and I think that Nuno will make a difference at West Ham. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Gareth, well, enjoy this weekend, enjoy the international break, and we will be back for match week 12 after the international break when, of course, Spurs face Arsenal away at the Emirates. That is going to be a very tough and interesting game. And, of course, Spurs also face PSG away in the Champions League. So after the international break, Spurs have 2 huge games coming up.
A baptism of fire when you come back from international break. But look, we'll worry about United this weekend. Chris, I'll see you at the stadium on Saturday, sir. Yes, look forward to it. Thank you so much, Gareth. Enjoyed your company this evening, talking football, and we love talking about football. We could be here for hours, and we've been here for almost 2. So thanks for watching, everyone. Thanks for listening. Enjoy your weekend, and as always, come on, you Spurs.